Laura Matthews never thought that at 48 years old she would feel invisible, yet that's exactly how life seemed to make her feel. She had given 2 decades of her life to her family and to her job, believing she was building something lasting, something that mattered. But slowly, she started noticing the little things, the way younger coworkers overlooked her during meetings, the way her suggestions were brushed aside, and the subtle but painful silence when someone would comment about how the industry was for the young. She would sit quietly, forcing a polite smile, but inside her heart sank a little deeper every time. She often asked herself, "Is this it? Am I really too old to matter now?" It hadn't always been that way. Laura was once a young, passionate woman full of ideas, someone who believed her creativity and dedication would carry her far. She had started her career in marketing, climbing steadily through the ranks. She was the person people went to when things fell apart. She could find solutions in chaos. At home, she was a wife, a mother, a daughter, and a friend who seemed to always hold everything together. But when her marriage ended after 20 years and her children left for college, she suddenly found herself alone in a quiet house with nothing but echoes of the past. She poured herself into her work, hoping it would give her purpose again. But even there, she felt the sting of being underestimated. One particular day stood out to her. It was a Friday morning meeting, the kind where ideas were tossed around for a new campaign. Laura had stayed up half the night preparing her pitch, researching, planning, and creating something she believed would make an impact. When she finally spoke, her voice calm but firm, she saw one of the younger men across the table smirk as if her idea was outdated before she even finished. He leaned back, arms crossed, and said, "That's a bit old-fashioned, don't you think? We need something fresh." The room chuckled lightly, and the conversation moved on. Laura sat there, her face burning, but she didn't argue. She closed her notebook slowly, realizing her words didn't carry the same weight they once did. That afternoon, she went for a walk through the park, the crisp air brushing against her cheeks as leaves crunched beneath her boots. She thought about how people viewed age like a limitation, a barrier that locked someone out of opportunity. She asked herself what it meant to matter, and if she had already crossed the invisible line where society decided she no longer did. She was exhausted from trying to prove her worth to people who didn't even see her anymore. Sitting on a bench, she pulled out a small notebook she always carried. For the first time, she didn't write marketing strategies or project notes. She wrote about herself, her fears, her hopes, her determination not to fade away. That small act of writing became a seed of change. Weeks turned into months, and Laura began writing every night. What started as journaling became stories, reflections, and lessons from her own life. She wrote about resilience, about heartbreak, about rediscovering strength when you feel broken. Slowly, she realized that her experiences were valuable in ways the younger crowd at work couldn't see yet. Her voice had depth, and her words carried wisdom that only time could give. She decided to share her thoughts at a small community center group she joined on weekends. She was nervous the first time she spoke in front of them, clutching her notes tightly, her hands trembling. But as she read, she noticed people leaning in, listening intently. Some nodded, some smiled, and some even teared up. For the first time in years, Laura felt truly seen. Encouraged, she continued. She started volunteering at mentorship programs, teaching young adults how to navigate challenges not just in careers but in life. People admired her perspective, realizing she had lived through storms and come out standing. One evening, a young woman approached her after a session, tears in her eyes, and said, "I was ready to give up, but your story reminded me I still have a chance. Thank you." That moment struck Laura deeply. Her words had power, and she was finally using them where they mattered most. Her confidence began to grow, piece by piece. She no longer saw her age as a weakness, but as her strength. She started to notice that her coworkers, the same ones who once dismissed her, now leaned on her for advice when they struggled. They had started to realize that experience was not something you could fake or replace. It was earned through years of trial, error, and resilience. Laura no longer sought validation from them. Instead, She focused on creating a life where her worth wasn't tied to their recognition. 1 year after that humiliating meeting, Laura was invited to speak at a professional conference. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same industry that had tried to push her aside now wanted her to share her insights. She stood backstage, heart racing, wondering if she would stumble, if she would forget her words. But as soon as she walked out and faced the audience, something shifted. She wasn't afraid anymore. She looked around at the sea of faces, some young, some old, and realized that every person in that room was searching for inspiration, for proof that they mattered. She delivered her speech with passion, sharing not just strategies but also her story of resilience, of being told she was too old and finding out she was only just beginning. The applause that followed was thunderous. But more than the applause, it was the people who came up afterward to thank her that left her humbled. One young man said, "I judged my mother the same way. Now I see how wrong I was." Another woman whispered, "You reminded me that my dreams aren't over." Laura left that stage with tears in her eyes, but this time they were tears of pride, not pain. Her life wasn't perfect after that. There were still challenges, still moments of doubt. But she never again allowed anyone to define her worth. She knew her story was far from over, and she embraced every day with a newfound courage. Laura discovered that the very thing people thought made her irrelevant, her age, was what made her extraordinary. She mattered, not despite her years, but because of them. And so, when people whispered behind her back or doubted her again, she simply smiled. Because she knew the truth. She wasn't too old. She was timeless.